Welcome once again to Pearls of the Torah. I'm Moreh Matan, Pastor Matt McKeown, and I'm glad to be with you every single week as we study the Torah. This week we are in a brand new book of the Torah, Sefer Shemot, the book of names, or as we call it in English, Exodus. And it is exciting for us, as I mentioned this week in the Rashi Nash. It's always interesting when we meet a new person, a new hero of ours, a new hero in the faith. And this week, of course, we are introduced to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, Moses, our rabbi. So if you've not already done so, please subscribe to this channel and please share this video on your social media so that as many people as possible can be blessed by it. As always, I remind you that in this Torah cycle, we are looking at the commentary of the Or HaChaim, and let's see what our dear friend the Or HaChaim says about Parashat Shemot. So our first verse we're going to look at is Exodus 1:7. The children of Israel were fruitful and swarmed and increased and became very, very strong, and the land became filled with them. Now, the Or HaChaim mentions several things. We're going to look at 2 points on this verse. Number 1 is divine assurance, and number 2 is miraculous expansion. So the Or HaChaim notes that this extraordinary growth fulfills God's promise to the patriarchs. Even under oppression, the people multiplied in a way that defied natural expectations. This is so important for us to know because as the promise was made to Avraham Avinu, that your children, your descendants, would be like the sand of the seashore or the stars in the sky, well, obviously, we're not able to count that high, all of the stars or all of the grains of sand. And so there had to be this miraculous expansion of the children of Israel, and that's exactly what happened. So if we rewind the scroll a little bit, a couple of weeks, when Jacob's family comes down into Egypt, Joseph makes sure that they get the great land in that place called Goshen, and they really begin to thrive. And this is exactly what happens. And it was by divine decree. It was by prophecy that this happened, this divine assurance and this miraculous expansion. The Or HaChaim emphasizes that the Hebrew verbs describing their increase indicate supernatural blessing, illustrating that God's covenant overrides Egypt's attempts to stifle Israel. And this is something that I think that we need to bear in mind. If the Lord has spoken over us something that is going to be, it doesn't matter how much the enemy tries to attack us. If God says that it will be, then it will be, and we don't need to worry about it. This is simply something that is going to be fact because God has spoken it. Now, let's look at point number 2 with regard to Pharaoh's new decrees. Now, it says there in Exodus 1:8 and 9, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we. Now, the Or HaChaim is one of those commentators that brings up something that I think even Rashi brings up, and that is the multiple interpretations of new. A new Pharaoh came into power. Well, is it really a new Pharaoh, or is it the same Pharaoh with a new attitude? So the Or HaChaim addresses the rabbinic discussion about whether this was truly a new king or the same king with a new policy that was against Israel. He notes that either way, Pharaoh acted as if he had no obligation toward Joseph's legacy. Now, this is something that is important for us to note. It's, of course, important in my life because I am a leader at a congregation where my father had been the previous leader, the previous pastor, for over 3 decades. So there is a certain way that things are done, and there are people that are going to expect you to continue the same types of things, the same types of ministries, the same types of policies and procedures as the previous leadership. And on purpose, we have kept going a lot of those things because in our ministry, You become really accustomed and very comfortable to certain things. And we are creatures of habit. And so we get used to things being done a certain way. Now, it has taken 4 years or so. In August of this year, it will be 5 years that I have been the senior pastor at our church. And only in the last year or so have we really felt that people have begun to really look at my wife and I as the leadership there of the church. And it is so easy to understand. Anytime that we have a switchover, there is maybe a time of getting accustomed to things. But something that people really get wrong, I think, is when people come in and they just have a regime change. I'll never forget, I went to a private high school. I went to a Christian high school. And when a new pastor came in, it was his policy that I want to have an all-new staff. And this, of course, caused a bit of an upset. And there were some people that thought that that was good and it was a very bold decision. And there are other people that thought, oh, it was just too much change too fast. You know, you could look at it either way. It's always a good thing if something needs to be remembered for good, that we remember that. And this Pharaoh, whether or not he was a brand new Pharaoh or not, he did not give the respect and the deference to the Jewish people on account of what Joseph had done before this era. And it's a real problem, I think. You know, we see the same problem with Rehoboam in the kingdom of Israel. We see this split in the kingdom of Israel because of the things that happen where he makes statements like, you know, you think my father was tough. I'm much tougher than him. My little finger is bigger than my father's thigh. I mean, he makes all these very brash and bold statements trying to make a point of I am different. There's a new sheriff in town, so to speak. And sometimes this is not the right way to do things. Now, we have this idea that the Orach Chaim brings up as well as being fearful motives. By stating that Israel had grown stronger, Pharaoh incited fear among the Egyptians, justifying oppressive decrees that set the stage for Israel's eventual redemption. Isn't this exactly what we see in the book of Esther? You know, king, there is a people among us. They are different. They do things in a different way. They are not a part of us. They're not assimilated. Isn't this exactly what we saw in the lead up to the Holocaust? The setting up of the ghettos and things like that. There's this people over here. We need to treat them differently. We need to be fearful of them. They're causing all sorts of trouble. They're bringing in diseases. They're causing financial ruin. When we are afraid of something, then we will act toward it in a certain way. When we're afraid of a group of people, we will be prejudiced against them. And it's a real shame, but this has happened throughout history. It's something that people use as a tool, fear against the other. And that has been used, unfortunately, against Israel and the Jewish people for millennia. Now, let's look at number 3, the midwives' defiance. It says there in Exodus 1:17, but the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt spoke to them. They kept the boys alive. Remember this decree went out from Pharaoh. If you are on the birthing stool, if a girl is born, allow her to live. If it is a boy, if it's a male child, then you must throw him into the Nile. He must be killed. What a terrible, terrible thing, a slaughter of the innocents. Now, the Orach Chaim brings up 2 things, the fear of God versus the fear of Pharaoh, and the preservation of a nation. I think I should just mention, just because it's an extra little nugget that we can really be blessed by, and that is, according to Jewish tradition, these midwives are none other than Moses' mother and sister, of Yocheved and of Miriam, these 2 midwives. This is something that is really miraculous, as we see that God allowed the Jewish women to give birth quickly. They were very strong. They also, according to tradition, were giving birth to a lot of sets of twins and triplets, just having lots and lots of children. And this, of course, was part of God's supernatural blessing. Now, the fear of God versus the fear of Pharaoh. The Or HaChaim underscores that the midwives' reverence for God surpassed their fear of Pharaoh's punishment, and they were blessed because of it. We also see the preservation of a nation. He explains that their courage and their standing up for what was right, this courageous stance, became a pivotal factor in safeguarding the line of Israel's future leadership, foiling Pharaoh's intent to cripple Israel's population at its root. Again, the enemy attacks. God says, no, this is not what's going to happen. My people are going to prosper. It's such a beautiful story. It's probably time that you again watch that animated film, The Prince of Egypt. Let's look at number 4, the birth and protection of Moses. In Exodus 2, verses 2 and 3, it says, "The woman conceived and bore a son. She took a wicker basket and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the Nile." Now, it is interesting to me that the command from Pharaoh was to throw the boys into the Nile, and that is exactly what his mother did. After he got to a certain age, she indeed put him in the river, but in a protective basket. So wonderful. So the Or HaChaim talks about Moses' hidden identity and God's providential details. The Or HaChaim highlights how Moses' early concealment reflects the hidden nature of divine deliverance. Though danger loomed, God orchestrated each step to preserve the future Redeemer. Now, the Or HaChaim also notes that the reeds on the Nile bank and the basket were divinely chosen details, ensuring that Moses would be found by Pharaoh's daughter, who was uniquely positioned to raise him. Now, something that is really awesome, Pharaoh's daughter, who is later referred to as Batya, or daughter of the Lord, this is so interesting. It says that she went down to bathe, but what Rashi and many other commentators tell us is that what she actually was doing was to go down to immerse, that she had turned away from idolatry, that she was going to follow the God of Israel, the true and living God, and she was renouncing paganism and idolatry, going down to immerse. And as she goes down, as she takes upon this new identity of being a daughter of God, this is when she finds Moses. Isn't this wonderful? Are we getting in the way of our own mission by not submitting to the Lord and repenting? After her repentance and starting anew, she finds this very important baby. This is really quite interesting and miraculous. And you know the story about how Moses' sister was watching, and she said, "Would you like for me to get one of the nurses, one of the Hebrew women, to nurse the baby?" And she got her mom, Moses' own mother, to nurse him, and she got paid for it. What an amazing thing. There's a whole sermon there that we could do. Let's look at number 5, Moses' heart for his people. In Exodus 2:11, it says, "It happened in those days that Moses grew up, went out to his brethren, and observed their burdens." Now, the Or HaChaim says that the phrase Moses grew up means not just physically, but in moral consciousness. His emerging leadership is evidenced by his concern for Hebrew suffering. The Or HaChaim also brings up his solidarity with Israel. Despite being raised in Pharaoh's palace, Moses' decision to identify with his brethren underscores his covenantal connection and sets him on a path toward his prophetic destiny. If we look back in the rear view mirror, so to speak, of our lives, can't we see all the things that God lined up to get us to a certain point? The same is true with Moshe Rabbeinu. This is exactly what is happening. Then, of course, we have, in our next point, point number 6, the flight from Egypt. In Exodus 2:15, it says, "Pharaoh heard of this matter." Remember, Moses saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating one of his Hebrew brethren, and he killed the man and hid his body in the sand. So Moses fled from Pharaoh's presence and settled in the land of Midian, in the land of Midian. Now, Just as Joseph was sent ahead of his brothers and his father, the other members of their family, to sort of, set up their salvation, so too, ahead of Moses was sent by God himself his future father-in-law, Jethro, the high priest of Midian. We have mentioned before in previous Torah cycles that Jethro was originally known as Jether and was one of 5 advisors to Pharaoh. When the problem arose, what to do with these Israelites? They're getting way too numerous. What should we do? There were some that said we should kill them. There was an advisor that said we should enslave them. And Jether, who later was known as Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, did not consent to either of these things. He was not in favor of enslaving the Jewish people or in killing them. So because of that, he left Egypt as well. He left, settled in Midian, and as our rabbis tell us, he studied every religion, every pagan idolatry that could be known at that time. He worshiped all the different gods. And this is why later on he is able to say to Moses, now I know that Israel's God is above every God, because he knew from experience, because he had worshiped all of them. So Jethro is now in Midian. Here comes Moses as he flees there to connect with him. And he becomes a shepherd for his father-in-law. It's really quite interesting the way that the Lord really lines everything up. The Or HaChaim explains that Moses' flight was a necessary stage in his development, illustrating how God removes his chosen servant from one setting to prepare him for a higher mission elsewhere. I think that's beautifully put. And also we see a preparation for leadership. He points out that Midian becomes a transformative place where Moses learns humility and shepherding, both prerequisites for guiding Israel. You see, Israel needed someone who grew up in the palace of a king, someone who had that type of leadership. But God also needed Moses to have the type of leadership where it's like leading a flock of sheep, the type of gentle and quiet leadership of being a shepherd. So all of this is working toward Moses' eventual destiny. Now, 2 more points for this week. Number 7, the burning bush revelation. Exodus 3:2, it says, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from within a thorn bush. The Or HaChaim says that this is a symbol of God's compassion. He explains that the lowly thorn bush was chosen to symbolize God's empathy toward Israel's affliction. The divine presence in a humble burning bush reflects God's closeness to those who suffer. It also is a sign of indestructibility. He notes that though the bush burned, it was not consumed, an assurance that Israel would endure amidst the fires of Egyptian oppression. Remember, when it says that they were, in their spirit, they were pressed. It was almost like they were out of breath as God sees them suffering. Rabbi Shapira has told us that in modern Hebrew, that's the word for asthma, that they literally were short of breath. They couldn't breathe. They were being squeezed. Remember, Egypt, or Mitzrayim in Hebrew, means a tight place, a place of constriction, a place that is claustrophobic. It's squeezing in on you. But what the destiny was for the Jewish people was for God to send them into wide open places, for them to be free. Now, in our last point, we see God's name and Moses' mission. God says to Moses, say, I am that I am. A better translation of this is, I will be what I will be. Say this to the children of Israel, I will be who I will be has sent me to you. Now, the Or HaChaim says that this emphasizes the eternal nature of God, the Eyeh Asher Eyeh. Eyeh Asher Eyeh underscores God's timeless existence and ongoing involvement in history. I will be what I will be means that in every situation, God is exactly what we need. Exactly what we need. And also, we see an empowerment of Moses because he explains that by revealing this name, God equips Moses with an unassailable authority. Moses' mandate rests on the eternal, ever-present reality of the Almighty, ensuring the success of Israel's redemption. This is so important. As we are looking at this brand new book of the Torah, the book of Shemot, or names, we see that God even reveals his name to Moses. Names are very important in this week's Torah portion. Thank you for joining me every single week at this time as we study the Torah together. I pray that it is a blessing to you. Once again, please subscribe to this channel and share this video on your social media so that as many people as possible can be blessed by it. Please consider supporting Ahavat Ami Ministries International. You can go to ahavatami.org, which means for the love of my people, and support Rabbi Shapira and his ministry there. Please pray for us as we are about to do some travel. Rabbi Shapira is heading to Africa, to Zimbabwe, to work with the Lemba people, a tribe of people in Zimbabwe that have Jewish background, Jewish DNA, Jewish blood. And Rabbi Shapira, along with myself and my wife, Kara, will be traveling both to Australia for our conference there and to a conference in Korea. In fact, after we leave, Rabbi Shapira is staying another week to do a second conference in South Korea. So please pray for him and his continued travel. Pray for his safety, for his health, and for all of us and our leadership on the ground as we do these conferences. Many blessings to you and to all of your family. An early Shabbat Shalom to you. And we say Kol Tuv, all the best that the Lord has to you and to all your family.